When I refused to lend my wife's brother money, her family declared a boycott of our wedding anniversary and sent me a Venmo request for $5,000 instead. My wife looked at me and whispered, "Just this once." I turned the phone around and said, "Then just this once, sleep at your parents tonight." Her jaw dropped as I walked out. My name is Alan, and I'm 42. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and I've been working as a building inspector for the better part of 20 years. My days are spent in crawl spaces, attics, up ladders, and down in basements. I know the sounds of a house settling versus a house screaming for help. You learn to listen differently when you do what I do. It teaches you to spot hairline fractures before they become collapse. But funny thing, even after all these years, I didn't spot the cracks forming in my own life until everything had already started to cave in. Naomi and I had been married for 10 years. We met in the most ordinary of ways, a coffee shop, of all places. She was reading some article on behavioral psychology, curled up in a turtleneck sweater, and I was fumbling with a lid on a to-go cup. My hand slipped, and coffee splashed onto my shirt. She laughed, not mockingly, just openly. The kind of laugh that felt like light coming through a window you didn't know existed. We hit it off, dated for 2 years, married in a small ceremony at her cousin's house in Miami. Her family was everywhere, in the kitchen, on the porch, in the garden, stringing up lights. They hugged too hard, talked too loud, and didn't let silence hang in the air for more than 2 seconds. I wasn't used to that. I grew up in a divorced home, tossed between a dad who didn't know what to do with me and a mom who barely had time. So the chaos of Naomi's family felt like a carnival. It was loud, yes, but it was full. I thought that fullness meant love. Maybe it did, in its own way. For the first few years, I tried to be a part of it. I brought dishes to potlucks, helped with backyard repairs during family visits, listened to long conversations I only half understood. I thought if I kept showing up, they'd eventually see me as one of them. But that never really happened. There was always a distance, a slight tilt in their heads when I talked, a faint sense of them waiting for me to catch up to their way of being. Naomi was the bridge. She always made it feel like we were on the same side. Until the day I wasn't. It started, oddly enough, with what should have been a celebration. Our 10-year anniversary was coming up, and I had planned something special. A private weekend in a cabin up near Boone. Naomi had always loved the mountains, especially in early spring when the air still had a bite, but the trees were waking up. I booked a secluded place with a hot tub overlooking Grandfather Mountain. I even arranged for a chef to come cook dinner one night and a massage therapist for the afternoon before. I told her about it the week before we were set to leave. She was touched, emotional even. She kissed me twice on the cheek before walking away to call her mom. I remember thinking that I hadn't seen her smile that wide in months. Things had been tense, nothing dramatic, just the slow burn of fatigue that creeps into any marriage. I thought maybe this trip would reset things. I thought we were finally going to find our rhythm again. Then the text came. It was from her brother, Javier. I barely need to say more, but for the sake of clarity, Javier is the kind of man who can talk himself into anything and out of everything. He's 38, has never held a steady job, and has been almost successful more times than I can count. Real estate, crypto, e-commerce, dropshipping, you name it. He's tried it all and failed at most. But somehow, he always lands on his feet, usually because someone else breaks his fall. The text read, "Hey man, I hate to ask, but I'm in a tight spot. Need to cover some costs on a deal that's about to close. Can you lend me $5,000? Just for a month. I swear I'll pay it back with interest." It was late when I read it. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I showed Naomi the message the next morning over coffee. She read it quietly, then looked at me and said, "He's trying. He just needs a chance." I had to take a moment before I answered. "Naomi, we've given him chances. He's had more than anyone I know. But this one is different," she said softly. "He really believes in this." That sentence, "he really believes in this," it rang in my ears all day. Like belief was a reason to overlook everything else. Like belief was more powerful than history, facts, or common sense. I told her no. Firmly. Calmly. She didn't argue. Not much, anyway. Just walked away. I thought maybe she understood. Turns out, she didn't. A few days later, we were in the cabin. It was beautiful, just like I hoped. The view stretched for miles, and the silence was thick in a good way. The kind that wraps around you. We cooked together, lit candles, played records. She even brought her wedding dress to show me it still fit, a tradition we started on our 5th anniversary. That night, we danced under a blanket of stars on the deck, slow and quiet. I thought we were okay. Then her phone lit up. She went still. I saw her eyes widen, just slightly. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated, then handed it to me. It was a Venmo request. From her mother. $5,000. The note said, "To support Javier in his time of need, since his own brother-in-law chose not to." Beneath it, a screenshot of the family group chat. A message from her aunt. "If Alan doesn't understand family, then we don't understand what he's celebrating." Another message. "We're not attending the anniversary." We can't support someone who turns his back on blood. I felt something snap inside me. Not rage, not sorrow. Something colder. Like a nerve had been severed. I looked at Naomi. She was already crying. I didn't know they would do this, she whispered. But you didn't stop them, I said. She didn't answer. Then, after a long pause, she looked down and said the words that ended something in me. Just this once. It was the way she said it, like I was the problem. Like I was being unreasonable. Like enabling her brother one more time was no big deal. I set the phone down gently, stood up, and said, then just this once, sleep at your parents' tonight. Her mouth parted slightly, a silent gasp, but I was already walking toward the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't raise my voice. I just left, and I drove home alone. The drive back to Asheville was quiet, even though the radio was on. One of those late-night classic rock stations that plays Springsteen and Eagles back-to-back like they're giving you a roadmap of regret. The roads were dark, winding through the hills, and every turn felt like a thought I didn't want to confront. When I got home, the house felt colder. Maybe it was the mountain air still clinging to my clothes, or maybe it was something else. I dropped my bag by the couch and just stood there for a while. Not thinking, not moving. Just standing. It felt like my body hadn't caught up with what had just happened. Like it needed a few hours to process that I had walked out of my marriage anniversary alone and wasn't sure when, if, I'd see my wife again. She didn't call that night. Or the next day. She stayed in Miami. At her parents' house. The same house we'd spent countless holidays in. The place where everyone always seemed to be talking over each other and passing plates of food so fast you couldn't keep track of what you'd eaten. Now they were talking about me, probably. And not in the way they used to, back when I was the quiet guy from North Carolina, who brought good wine and always fixed the garbage disposal. Naomi sent a text 2 days later. Just a few words. I need some time to think. I stared at that message for a long time before replying. Then I didn't reply at all. What was there to say? I wasn't angry anymore. That had passed on the drive home. What lingered was something heavier, something like disappointment, but deeper. Like something you thought was built to last had finally revealed its expiration date, and you'd been too hopeful to see it before. Work helped. I threw myself into inspections. Houses with sinking porches, basements with mold issues, roofs that had been patched instead of replaced. I found some comfort in the structure of it all. With buildings, you can trace the problem. You can see where the leak started, follow the trail of damage, measure the cost of repair. It's all numbers and angles. People aren't like that. I started sleeping on the couch. Not because I had to, but because the bed felt like a reminder. Of promises. Of laughter. Of nights lying next to each other without saying a word, but still feeling known. Marco, Naomi's cousin, called me about a week after. Said he just wanted to talk. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. Look, man, I know this isn't my business, but this thing with the money, it's not about the money. You know that, right? It's about what family means to them. I almost laughed. What family means to them. To them, family meant unquestioned loyalty. To me, it meant trust, mutual respect, a willingness to protect each other, even from themselves. Maybe we'd always meant two different things by the same word and never realized it until now. Naomi finally came back to Asheville 3 weeks later. I knew she was home because her keys jingled in the door the way they always did. Too many keychains, always in a rush. She walked in with a bag slung over her shoulder and looked around like she wasn't sure where to stand. I didn't know if you'd be here, she said. I looked up from the kitchen table. I hadn't expected her either. We stood there for a long time, not saying anything. She looked different, tired, somehow smaller. Like whatever fight she had before had burned out and left ash behind. She walked over, slowly, and sat across from me. I didn't want it to be like this, she said, finally. I nodded. Neither did I. I didn't ask them to send that request. I didn't even know they were going to. But you didn't stop it once it happened. She looked down. No, I didn't. There was another long pause. Then she said, Javier has always been fragile. And we've all spent our lives trying to protect him. Maybe we overdid it. Maybe I did. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd heard it before. That same word, fragile, used like a shield to excuse every lie, every manipulation, every irresponsible decision. I just thought, she continued, if we helped him this one time, maybe it would show him that we still believed in him. I stared at the wood grain of the table. It was something I'd sanded and stained myself a few years back. Took a whole weekend. It had been our first big project together in the house. She picked the stain. We argued about whether to round the corners. It's never just one time with him, I said. She knew I was right. I could see it in the way her shoulders dropped. I needed you to be on my side, she whispered. I said quietly. But I also needed you to be on mine. That was the core of it, wasn't it? We had built a life where we were supposed to be each other's home base. But somewhere along the way, other people moved in. Their needs became hers. And I became the unreasonable one for saying no. We didn't argue that night. There were no raised voices, no doors slammed. Just silence. Heavy and full. She stayed in the guest room. The next morning, she made coffee. The The same way I liked it, strong, one sugar. We sat on the back deck. She looked out over the yard and said nothing. I didn't press. That day passed like a quiet treaty. But treaties aren't peace. They're just pauses in conflict. The days after Naomi came back blurred together, but not in the way life used to when things were good. Back then, we used to fall into routines without noticing. Her putting on jazz in the mornings, me grumbling about how it was too early for Miles Davis. Her reading the news out loud, skipping the politics but pausing at the human interest stories. Little moments that built the scaffolding of what we called home. Now the silence was different. Not peaceful, just weighty. She went about her business like a guest in her own house. Polite, careful not to take up space. She made dinner twice. Chicken the first time, pasta the second. Both dishes we used to love. She didn't ask if I wanted any. Just left a plate on the counter, then disappeared upstairs. I ate them both. But I didn't say thank you. I didn't know how. One morning, about 2 weeks after her return, I found her sitting on the floor of the closet. The light was on. She had a box open, the one where she kept old cards, letters, the kind of things people always say they'll throw away, but never do. She had our wedding album beside her, flipped open to the photo of us dancing in the backyard under string lights. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. I used to think, she said, not looking up, that no matter how bad things got, we'd always find a way to laugh again. I leaned against the doorway. The carpet under my bare feet felt cold, but I didn't move. Do you still believe that? I asked. She ran her fingers over the photo and shrugged. I don't know. Neither of us spoke after that. The weeks dragged on. She stayed in the guest room. Sometimes I heard her on the phone late at night, whispering. Once I walked past the door and heard her crying. Another time, laughing. I didn't ask who she was talking to. I figured if it was important, she'd tell me. And she didn't. Meanwhile, I started dreaming of things breaking. Not metaphorically, literal things. In one dream, I was standing in a house I'd just finished inspecting. The floors gave way beneath me. In another, the walls cracked and peeled, the ceiling collapsing over a dinner table. I always woke up before I could be crushed. But the fear lingered long after sunrise. I told my friend Samuel, a guy I've known since college, about what was going on. We were having beers on his porch. It was raining, the way it always does in the mountains in spring. That slow, persistent drizzle that makes everything smell like soil and rust. She chose them, I said, over me. He nodded, slowly. Maybe. Or maybe she didn't know she had to choose. I didn't make her. No, he agreed. But you didn't bend either. I stared at the bottle in my hand, the condensation dripping onto my jeans. Should I have? He didn't answer. That night, I went home and stood in front of our bedroom door. The door she hadn't opened since she came back. I raised my hand to knock, then lowered it. I went to bed alone. We existed like that for another month. One evening, she stood in the hallway holding an envelope. Her eyes were puffy again, and I could tell she'd been holding on to whatever was inside for a while. It's from my dad, she said. He wants to talk. I didn't answer. He said we shouldn't let a little money ruin a family. I looked at her then, really looked. Not the way I used to, when I knew what she was thinking before she said it. But like someone trying to read a language they'd once been fluent in but hadn't spoken in years. Is that what this is about? I asked. A little money? She closed her eyes. It's not. But it is. You know. No, I didn't. And I didn't want to pretend I did anymore. I walked past her and went out to the garage. Spent the next hour reorganizing tools that didn't need reorganizing. Later, I heard her car start. I didn't look out the window. She came back a few hours later, didn't say where she'd gone. Just put her keys on the hook, poured herself a glass of water, and went upstairs. The next day, I found a printed itinerary on the kitchen counter. A list of family events in Miami. Javier's birthday. Her cousin's baby shower. Her parents' anniversary. She hadn't said a word about any of it. At the bottom, in her handwriting, you don't have to come. I understand. And somehow, that felt worse than anything else she could have said. Because I didn't want to be understood. I wanted to be fought for. But she didn't ask me to come. And I didn't offer. She left on a Thursday. Took her suitcase, her laptop bag, and the sweater she always wore when she traveled. She kissed my cheek before walking out the door. The kiss barely touched my skin. When she was gone, the house felt heavier than it ever had with her in it. I sat in the living room and didn't turn on the lights. Just sat there, the sun going down, shadows stretching across the walls. Around midnight, I got a text. From her mother. Naomi told us everything. I hope you come around soon. She loves you. I didn't reply. I went to bed. Slept for 3 hours. Woke up and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Naomi was gone for 10 days. In those 10 days, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took inventory. Not of the house, not of our finances, not even of the state of our marriage. I took inventory of myself. Of all the compromises I'd made. All the things I'd let slide under the guise of keeping peace. All the moments I'd watched her family undermine, override, and eventually override me entirely. And how I'd said nothing. But silence isn't peace. It's just fear dressed as maturity. Day 4, I called my accountant. Asked him to look over our joint accounts. There were no surprises, but the patterns were there. Money moving out of savings every few months in neat little chunks. Naomi always handled transfers, and I trusted her. I didn't think she was stealing from me. I still don't. But she was funding things. Quietly. Like a backup wallet for her family's mistakes. Day 6, I went to the cabin. The one I'd rented for our anniversary. I stayed one night alone. It was cold, the hot tub unused, the fridge empty. I sat on the deck and looked at the stars. And I asked myself the hardest question I've ever asked. If this wasn't Naomi, would you stay with her? The answer was no. I loved her deeply. Still do. In some threadbare, worn-down way. But love, on its own, wasn't enough anymore. Not when it had become a transaction. Not when being loved meant being tolerated, not understood. Day 10, she came home. The house was spotless. I'd done laundry, mowed the lawn, even fixed the drawer in the bathroom that had been jammed for months. She walked in with a suitcase, sunglasses on her head, and something unreadable in her eyes. She stood in the kitchen like a guest again. "I'm back," she said. I nodded. "I can see that." There was a long silence. Then she asked, "Can we talk?" I motioned toward the table. She sat down. I stayed standing. "I saw Javier," she said. Well, he's not changing." "No," I agreed. "He's not." And I told my parents they crossed a line. That it wasn't their place to interfere like that. I raised an eyebrow. Did they agree? She hesitated. Not really. But they listened. I waited. There was more. I could feel it. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A check. Made out to me. For $5,000. "I'm sorry I put you in that position," she said. "This is what they asked for. So I figured I'd make it right." I didn't touch the check. I just stared at her. "You think this fixes it?" I asked. "No," she said, voice quiet. "But it's a start." I leaned back, arms crossed. "You know what I did while you were gone?" She shook her head. "I talked to my lawyer." Her face went still. "Alan, don't worry," I said. "Not for divorce." Relief passed over her face like a shadow. But it didn't last. I had him draft something else. Something binding. A financial boundary agreement. It says you won't move more than $200 from any joint account without written approval. And that none of our money goes to your family without my signature. Ever again. She blinked. "That's dramatic." "No," I said. "That's marriage. The kind where both people matter." She didn't argue. I laid the folder in front of her. She stared at it, then slowly signed it. And that should have been the end. But it wasn't. Because a week later, I mailed something to her parents. Certified letter. Inside were 3 things. A copy of the financial boundary agreement. A check for $5,000. The same one Naomi had handed me, uncashed. A handwritten note that read, "I'm returning this to you because I don't want your money. But I also won't forget how quick you were to demand it. Going forward, any conversations about your son's finances will be redirected to a new party, Javier. I trust he's the adult you've raised him to be." I didn't hear back. Not a word. But Naomi told me, later, that her father stopped speaking to Javier for a while after that. Said he needed to grow up. That was all I ever wanted. We're still married. But it's different now. Not better. Not worse. Just real. Like we finally stopped pretending we were 2 people with the same expectations. Like we're starting over. Not as lovers, not yet. But as 2 people finally being honest. And sometimes, that's more satisfying than revenge ever could be.